Hey everybody, and welcome to week 10. This week we are going to be looking at two large processes, movements, if you will, that developed in the United States, or what we call the antebellum period. That is the period in the United States during the 19th century before the Civil War. So really like the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And during that time, many things are happening, but two things that you want to know for this week are the development known as the First Industrial Revolution is going on in the United States. And there are also at the same time a series of reform movements occurring. And by reform, I mean things like women's rights. There's a development towards women recognizing themselves as occupying a position not necessarily so dissimilar to slaves. And in fact, many of these early female reformers liken themselves to being like slaves. You'll see the abolitionist movement, which of course attempted to try and eradicate slavery. Some people argued for immediate emancipation, some argued for gradual emancipation. That said, many abolitionists frequently did not necessarily want to see social and political equality, although they may have wanted to see slavery go away. There is also the temperance movement, which was a movement to try and temper the consumption of alcohol, and there's a bunch of causes for why that occurred. There's also things like education reform, health reform, penal colony, not penal colonies, but penal code reform, that is dealing with the penitentiary system, asylum reform. There were a number of utopian societies that were created at this time, such as the Oneida Colony, basically places that were created as a way for people to basically create a society based upon their understanding of what a perfect society would look like. And a lot of those reform movements find context in a revivalist movement called the Second Great Awakening. There was a First Great Awakening that we've talked about before, but there's a second one. And that Second Great Awakening kind of gives a religious impulse to try and perfect human society. And that's why a lot of these reform movements sort of develop as they do. They look at things like drunkenness and the subservient position of women and even slaves, and problems with the jail system. And what their objective is to try and create a perfect society. It's known as perfectionism. And the idea is that if you could perfect human society or create societies that were perfect, then Jesus Christ could come back and do his millennial reign. At least that was the idea. So that's one aspect we're going to talk about, and we're just going to talk about a few of these reform movements. I don't have time to go through all of them. And then the other part is, of course, the Industrial Revolution, and this was a revolution in textile manufacturing. It mainly took off in the northern portion of the country. Much of the Industrial Revolution really began to get underway after the War of 1812, really even before the War of 1812 with Jefferson's embargo against the British. And the reason for it is because we were trading with the British, who had industrialized much further along than almost any other country. But once we went to war with them, they cut off trade with the United States, and so we basically had to learn to industrialize on our own and begin to manufacture goods here in the United States. And we will predominantly make textile goods. And these goods and the market revolution, which corresponds with it, significantly changes American society. It changes humanity's relationship to work. It changes the type of skilled and semi-skilled and low-skilled individuals who are able to occupy places of work. It even allows for women to obtain jobs in factories. I think of the Lowell girls in the Lowell, Massachusetts factory in Massachusetts these young women, farm girls mainly from the neighboring countryside, were able to come and get work at the Massachusetts factory. Eventually they will be replaced with immigrant labor. But one of the interesting things about the Lowell girls is that they were the very first labor union in the United States. They recognized the poor working conditions, low pay, and they struck. So a very significant movement. And so we're going to be talking about that as well. Number of videos for this week. No particular lecture from me this week, but there are a number of videos. So make sure you're going through that. Of course, you have your discussion boards for this week, so get those in on time. Otherwise, as always, have a great and blessed week and go in peace. Be warm and filled. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper, and may the odds forever be in your favor.